This is polyaesthetic mapping. In the context of our study, when we use the word aesthetic, we mean it to be the study of psychological, or should we say emotional, responses to a particular expression. And when we talk of aesthetic category, we are speaking of terms like music, fine art, commercial art, mathematics, applied science, crafts, design, engineering and technology, as well as others. Mapping is a way to take complex phenomena and abstracting it to a simpler form to make it easier to access and more understandable in its relationship to other things. The goal in this polyaesthetic mapping system is to give one a tool that will enable one to categorize any aesthetic expression and measure its aesthetic category in relation to other expressions and their aesthetic categories. Furthermore, to help easily visualize these relationships. What happens when we view art and science as categories of aesthetics? What other categories of aesthetics might we discover? What is the relationship of these other aesthetic categories to art and science? Is it possible to create a mathematical expression that defines aesthetic category? Can we visualize aesthetics within a mathematical space? Can we create a mathematical model that has the ability to map any aesthetic expression? Can we create a mapping system that separates the aesthetics of science from the aesthetics of art to see the power of combining the two? Polyaesthetic mapping is one such answer to all of these questions. If you think back to grade school, you may remember the teacher presenting you with the concept of a number line. It was a single line with a gradation of values, much like the cartoon shown here. In the cartoon you can see the gradation between 5 and the number -5, and you will notice 0 in the middle. We can do the same with any two concepts by placing them in space and thinking of a gradation between them. Here we have the concepts of utility and non-utility, and the point in between these concepts is an equal value of each of them. That is 50% utility and 50% non-utility. In our polyaesthetic mapping system, we map aesthetic expressions along 3 different number lines, or shall we say 3 different dimensions. Let's look at our model. The blue line in this model shows us our first dimension, which spans between the concepts of the aesthetics of direct sensory experience and the aesthetics of thinking. By the aesthetics of direct sensory experience, we are talking about that emotional experience which you receive immediately, with no effort in thinking, much like the beauty or horror you receive while looking at a particular painting. When we say the aesthetics of thinking, we are speaking to the emotional experience that one receives during the process of thinking about the aesthetic expression. An example would be the beauty one receives while exploring a novel mathematical proof to the Pythagorean theorem. Our second dimension, the yellow line, is the example we saw earlier, where we have the concept of utility at one end and the concept of non-utility at the other end. By utility, we are talking about an expression that's beauty or horror is tied directly to its function and not to the object itself. And at the other end of this expression we have non-utility. What we mean by this term is that the emotion experienced from the aesthetic expression comes from the object itself as opposed to its function, because it serves no purpose other than its own beauty or horror. And our last dimension, the green line, involves 2 different skills. At one end of the axis we have the skill of design or mental prowess, that is the beauty or horror in thinking about how it was created. At the other end we have the physical skill of craft, which is the beauty experienced by recognizing the difficulty of the task and by the years of practice it took to achieve the skill that it took to produce the expression. So let's map a couple of expressions. For the first mapping, let us look at Garden of Prayer, a painting by the artist Thomas Kincaid. Since my choice is controversial, please let me underscore that this system is about aesthetic category, not aesthetic value. Kincaid's painting serves my purpose quite well to illustrate just how this mapping system functions. Furthermore, let me also mention that this is about your perspective on these aesthetic categories. And of course, in my examples, it's about my perspective, but I think that it serves as a useful example for you to understand a little bit about the mechanics of mapping. There are other videos that will help make your understanding more profound. For the Kincaid painting, I would say that this painting is more about the aesthetics of direct sensory experience as opposed to the aesthetics of thinking. So it would hang more over in this area. It's also more about craft as opposed to design. So it would fall more in this area. And then of course I see it as non-utility, which forces it over somewhere in close to this corner. So in this blue octant, you'll find a lot of paintings mapped here. And for the other example, I wish to map the engineering concept for the space shuttle. Not the space shuttle itself, but the engineering concept, as you can see in this drawing. In this example, I find it to be a wonderful design and that it evokes beauty while thinking about how the object was put together, as well as beauty in the thinking about this object, and the thinking this object evokes. I also find it to be in the category of utility, for it serves many purposes for scientific discovery. So, on the mapping system, we have thinking and utility and also design. So it would map up in this octant over here, directly opposite of the Kincaid. Let me reiterate, you'll notice that these two examples are in opposite octants in this three-dimensional grid. My question to you is, what objects map into the other octants? I would also like to mention in the polyaesthetic mapping system that there are 9 muses. Each corner of each octant is occupied by a muse, as well as a muse in the center that has all of the attributes of all of the muses. There are other videos that describe the muses. Look for them.